Well, I've always wanted to play at the University of Minnesota football stadium. I guess this is as close as I'm going to get is actually speaking here. But thank you all for coming today to join us in what I think is a very, very important conversation. All the partners in this room, the nonprofits, the faith-based organizations, superintendents, including my superintendent, Valeria Silva, who's my partner in crime in all things education in the city of St. Paul. We're very honored to have all of you joining us and to have Deputy Secretary Shelton join us, as well as Reverend Brenda Gerton-Mitchell, who's the Director of the Department of Education's Faith-Based and Neighborhood Initiatives. I know that that's not exactly the right title, but it's fairly close. Just so honored to have our guest here and all of those that have come to participate in this conversation. I think it's going to be a good conversation this afternoon and tomorrow. I think it's going to be a deep dive into how we, as leaders in this community, figure out how we are going to embed social emotional learning in all that we do, not just in the classroom, but particularly outside the classroom, where kids have opportunities to engage in different types of programs, and where leaders in communities that don't work within the walls of a school can play a very central and very specific role in the development of our well-rounded and successful children. It is part of a program that we are working with the Department of Education, the National League of Cities, to facilitate conversations around the country on different aspects of education. We have chosen here to focus in on social emotional learning. Other cities will take a slightly different approach that really reflects where their communities are at in their processes and their understanding of how it is that we're going to not only have all of our children succeed, but how fundamentally we're going to close the achievement gap between white communities and communities of color, between poor communities and wealthier communities, to make sure that every child that is born into our cities or raised in our cities and raised in our schools has the tools and the resources that they need to be successful. I want to just note Cliff Johnson, who is the director of the Institute for Youth Education and Families, for his leadership and his support. It really was, there are two people that have really helped me understand the role that mayors play. Dale is one of them, and he really helped me understand the importance of this, so thank you, Dale, and Cliff Johnson being the other. You know, I like to tell the story. There are a couple of reasons why I have felt such an important need to get involved in education in the city of St. Paul. It's very easy for a mayor to say, well, you know, that's not really my role. We'll let the school board or the superintendent handle that. It's not something we can do. But across the country, mayors are recognizing the seminal role that they play in closing the achievement gap in education. But a typical mayor's conversation will start off something like this. If you hear a mayor speak on education, almost the first words out of their mouth will be, well, you know, I don't control education. And it's understandable in the sense that they don't appoint the school board in most cities, or they don't appoint the superintendent in most cities, but it's kind of limited in the way that we think about the role of mayors in education and the role of community in education. The sentence, I don't control education, is maybe appropriate if all you think about is education as something that happens in a classroom from 7:30 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, from Monday through Friday, from September until May. But if you realize that education, as the Mott Foundation reminds us, is something that happens all day, every day, 365 days a year, in every aspect of that child's life, then there are very few people that have more responsibility in education than mayors and city council members and other community leaders. And it is particularly in these areas that we have the ability to shape the conversation around social and emotional learning. I really kind of came to this conversation in a couple different ways. Some of it is my work before I was mayor. Years ago, I was a public defender in Hennepin County. Spent many years, many hours in the courtroom in juvenile court. And it always struck me kind of odd that we would work with kids on one level when they were first involved in the system as a child that was in need of protection in a dependency neglect case, as we used to call them, or CHIPS cases as they were later called when I was working there. We would treat that child as a victim and would say, boy, this child really needs services, this child needs help. at some point that child would come back into the courtroom as a delinquency petition, and we would say that kid's on his route to being a perpetrator, that kid's on the route to being a criminal, if we haven't already been dubbed that. And then eventually that child that didn't get the right services or didn't get redirected would end up in adult court as an adult felon and heading off to prison. And yet that kid that was that adult that was heading off to prison was frequently that child that came in as a victim of the circumstances into which he or she was born and in need of the support of the community to help them get them on the right path. And so I've always struggled with why we treat the child one year as a victim and the next year we treat him as a perpetrator, even though the circumstances for that child hasn't changed dramatically. And it became clear to me that we have to be working more fully with that child in the community to help develop their skills and help them get on the right path. But I also believe in this work around social emotional learning because of my personal experiences. The lessons that I remember most were not lessons that happened in the classroom. They certainly weren't my math and science lessons. That's why I became a lawyer as opposed to a doctor. But the fact of the matter is I remember most those moments where something outside a classroom taught me that I had capabilities and skill sets that I might not have understood that I had. So it was the caring teacher that looked at me and just suggested to me I have potential to achieve more than I was currently achieving at that moment. It was that moment in Outward Bound when I was 17 years old, having been given a wilderness experience as a graduation present, where I had to step backwards off the cliff over Lake Superior, looking at the face of the 16-year-old girl that was on belay, knowing that my life was dependent upon her abilities to hold me up and to support me, and having the trust in that person, knowing that if I did climb back up in a few minutes, I would be supporting her and making sure that she stayed alive. And it really helps you when you understand the power that you have and the capabilities that you have and the intricate relationship that you have with other people in those moments. It is the lessons I learned hiking along a trail in Glacier National Park, or camping in storms, or trying to figure out exactly how it is that you could survive. It's not because those lessons on a daily basis serve me, but the skills that I developed, the persistence and the understanding that I could overcome obstacles, that I could overcome hurdles, that I could survive challenges in life, really served me well going into the future. And if you want to understand the importance of social emotional learning, knowing that you can overcome obstacles, be a mayor during pothole season. Because it is only those lessons I learned outside the classroom that give me the tenacity and the perseverance I need to survive dealing with potholes in the middle of a Minnesota winter. But the fact of the matter is our kids need these kind of supports. Our kids need the leadership of all of us in this room to integrate social emotional learning into not only what happens in the classroom, but the programs that we develop outside the classroom to develop the whole child, to give them the grit, the tenacity, the executive leadership skills, all of those social emotional skills that we talk about so that they can ultimately overcome obstacles that they face in their life. We've seen it directly with the KIPP academies that were very successful charter schools, very successful at getting their kids graduated from high school and into college. But after 6 years, only 13% of KIPP Academy graduates were graduating from high school, or rather graduating from college. And so they stepped back and said, wait a second, are we giving the kids the tenacity, the grit, the perseverance that they need to be successful when they can't figure out how to get their student loan application in, when they can't figure out how to deal with housing, or when there's a tragedy or a situation in their family that kind of knocks them off their center? The fact of the matter is, if we give the kids those social emotional skills that they need to be successful outside the classroom, they will be that much more successful inside the classroom. And so hopefully what will happen over the course of this conversation here is that we will understand better about what those skills are, about how we measure them, about how we embed them into the programs that we work on, and ultimately how we as a community come together to provide the support that the children need to ultimately succeed in life. And in that measure, that is the most important work that we can be doing in this community.